for it.
Yeah, so after like doing all the reading and reflecting, because grading is something that I'm struggling with right now because I'm working right now as a teacher, and I'm teaching 5th grade, which is standard-based grades. And so sometimes I feel like I know I don't have to grade everything,
Right.
but then also like is count like, participation or grading for homework, that's not really judging if they're getting that standard.
You're like teaching my class for me tonight right now, Susan.
So I'm really having a hard time wrapping my brain around that.
That's what we're going to talk about, the whole idea of grading behavior and homework tonight. But when it comes to standards-based grading, the biggest thing you want to do is you don't want to grade every single assignment. Your assignments are they're checks for understanding for you to see whether or not your students get it. If you grade it, you're putting pressure on them that they have to perform. And that goes against the whole idea of a growth mindset that we talked about, right? We want to encourage our students that there are opportunities for them to make mistakes, and that mistakes are opportunities to grow. And the only way you do that is by removing the stigma of grading from an assignment, because then once you remove it, then it's like you're saying it's safe to make mistakes here. And then you're allowed to teach them there. So for classroom assignments and everything, I mean, some people might disagree with me. Again, you're always getting my opinions. These are not the views of Brandman University. There's my, but you're getting my opinion as an educator that you want to save the things that you're going to put on your report card on whether or not they got it. It's summative, right? So if I'm doing a standards-based report card, I've got an assessment, an individual assessment for every standard. It might be very small. If I teach a standard over a week or two, I have an assessment for that one, and I'm going to mark whether they get it. Then I might have a giant summative assessment of all the standards I taught within a unit, and that might contribute to my grade as well. But when it comes to grading every assignment, one, you don't have time, and two, it eliminates the idea of a growth mindset with students. That's my opinion. Make sense?
It totally makes sense, and I really see it as though because it's a standard, are they understanding it?
Right.
But I have these parents that are like, how can my kid's grade get better? But it's like, I'm trying to explain to them, it's really their understanding. They're not, it's whether they're.
Yeah, it's not whether they're doing, and the thing we're fighting against in today's day and age is, well, I guess forever, but everybody knows everything about school. If you, parents never going to question their child's doctor because they've never gone and studied medicine. Parents never going to question a mechanic unless they have a mechanic in the family. They just take them at their word. But everybody questions teachers because everybody thinks, because they went to school for 13 years or longer, that they know everything there is about education. And so we get questioned a lot. And so you just have to, inform your parents. So we're going to talk about that tonight too. We're going to talk about parent conferences and how it's a great opportunity to educate your parents and get them on your page, and kind of as a professional development opportunity for parents. So let's jump in.
Thank you.
All right. You're welcome. All right. We're going to get rolling tonight. We are talking about grading and reporting on student progress. It's a very important part of what you do. It can be your worst nightmare, or it can be something that is good, that shows, that's reflective for you and reflective for students. So tonight, by the end of the night, you will be able to explain the purpose of grading, understand some different types of grading methods, how to communicate grades effectively, and the importance of tracking student achievement, both in academics and behavior. So what is the purpose of grading? It's to inform students and families about performance, right? This is how you're doing. This is how your child is doing in class. That's an important part. And the more involved a parent is, the more serious they take the grading, right? A lot of times it's, super involved parents, usually parents with college education. I'm generalizing here, so don't take offense if there's parents without college education that, take grading very seriously too. But the statistics show that it's the mother's education level that dictates student performance typically in school. And so that's typically because they found that research that mom is the nurturer at home that does most of the homework support in a home environment, and the higher academic level she has, the more value she puts on homework and grading and school. And so that data has been around for 20 years. But what we're doing is we're looking at, the academic, how are they doing? And if we send grades home to parents and you have supportive parents, they're going to push their kids to do even better. And that's why you have that type of environment. The opposite is true for families that maybe didn't go to school very long. Maybe you only have an 8th grade graduation. They don't have put a high value on grades in school, and so they pass those values on to their students. Now, of course, there's exceptions to every rule, and there are some students that perform regardless of their parents' education level, and there's some students who don't perform regardless of their parents' education level. So we use gradings to determine promotion, graduation, sports eligibility, club eligibility, things like that. Strengths, weaknesses, interests, sorting and selecting students. We do that, right? When we think about GATE, when we think about special education, we think about Tier 2, Tier 3, RTI. We sort and select our students all the time. When we think about differentiation, we use our grades to do that. It's data. We use grades to motivate kids. Sometimes we also use grades to beat kids up, and that's never good. I'm sure everybody here has a story of a high school or junior high teacher that used grades as a weapon against them, or they saw them use grades against other kids in the class, saying, you know, hey, if you don't get that in, or, you know, you guys have all misbehaved, I'm giving you all D's on that assignment. Or these, you know, inequitable grading with, hey, bring canned food in and I'll give you 20 points extra credit. Well, you think everybody's got a cabinet stocked full of canned food? So, you know, there's some wrong ways of using grading as well. Grades are used for research. You can pull a thesis off most college library shelves and see that they do correlational studies to student grades often. Some non-purposes of grading, kind of alluded to a couple, but we don't want to belittle or put down students with grades. We don't want to threaten students with grades. Hey, if you don't do this, I'll give you an F. It's not about you giving people. It should always be about what the students earned, and make it very clear how one can earn a grade or not. You want to remove yourself. You want to remove the personal part of it and make it very objective. Guilting parents. Yeah. Using it, like I said, using it as a weapon, or using it inequitably. That's the kind of the newer one I think I need to add to this class, is the whole idea of grading inequality or grading inequities in school nowadays when we think about that. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight, but not as in depth as I think sometimes this topic should go. How many of you have experienced any kinds of unequitable or inequitable grading in your career, for like maybe, hey, if you stay after school, you can get extra credit, or what's another one that, gosh, that I've seen even very recently was, get your agenda signed by your parent and that's worth points. Well, what if there's no parents at home, or they're working all night and they're asleep when the kids get up? You know what I mean? So there's lots of those little things that we just have to be aware of. There's nothing wrong with extra credit, Terry. Extra credit is good as long as it's equitable, right? As long as all students can access the same extra credit. And that's why when you think about the whole idea of, you know, bringing canned food in for a canned food drive for extra credit, and it's like, well, what about kids who don't have, like I said, a cabinet or a cupboard full of canned food? That's not equitable. So we just got to be careful. If you're going to say, Cyril, if you're going to have them watch a movie, you better make that movie available in your classroom so that they can all watch it, because we can't control the things that are happening at home. So don't ever mix data on behavior with data on academic achievement. And you're going to kind of see that as a trend tonight, and that's usually what happens. When we really talk about, we're going to talk about the subjectivity report cards, period, right? That's why standards-based report cards are really great, because you're measuring progress towards specific standards and you're marking that progress on a standards-based report cards. But traditional grading is what most parents want. And if we're thinking about, again, what's the purpose of grading, is for communicating with parents. The traditional A, B, C, D, F is great, but it can be subjective if you're not a good record keeper. If you're not keeping track of how do I get an A in this class? What does it mean that I have a C? If you can't answer those questions, and what ends up happening inevitably is the subjectivity falls in, which is so-and-so doesn't try hard in my class. And that should have nothing to do with academic grades or academic achievement, right? That they don't try. Because how many kids, I mean, I can tell you so many students who don't like school, who are brilliant, right? But they don't like the four walls and sitting in rows and the whole idea of school, but they're brilliant. And they might know the standards, but because they don't like school, they seem unengaged and they're disinterested, and then they get bad grades. Well, why don't we measure what they actually know in a way that they might want to show it? We've talked about that this whole term, right? The whole idea of differentiation based on interests and doing student-centered learning and moving kids and differentiating content, product, and process. And so all those things that we have to really bring in and we have to stop doing school the way school's always been done, because it's not serving our students well, okay? It's serving our kids that can do school, that play the game of school very well. But what about the rest of the population that is tired of playing this game? We got to get them ready for a world that's out there that school hasn't historically been getting them ready for. So some different grading systems. We have letter grades, A, B, C, D, F. Descriptive evaluations, right? We're just giving good, powerful feedback. When you think about giving feedback, what you want to do is you want to identify a goal, identify where the student is, and then address the gap, and then create a plan on how you're going to close that gap. That's what all feedback is. So think about that. That's the kind of feedback you want as a teacher, right? If your administrator came into your classroom and said, hey, our goal is to have every student answer every question every time. When I came into your classroom, I noticed 25% of your students not engaged or not talking. Here's what I think you could do to get those 25% engaged. What do you think? Stop by my office and let's talk about it. That's super clear, effective feedback, as opposed to, hey, great job, get some more students talking. Okay, unclear. What does that even mean? Or, hey, I want to see more kids talking in your class. Stop having them raise hands. Well, no, see, it's not effective. You got to identify the target or the goal, identify where the student or the person you're giving feedback to is currently at, and then address the gap and how they're going to get there. Make sense? Whole pass-fail, right? I used to love pass-fail when I was in college because it didn't mess with my GPA. Checklists of objectives. Students like checklists. We love checklists. How many of you have a checklist on your desk, right? Here are the things I need to do today. Check, 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 check. Or on your kitchen counter. Heck yeah, I live by checklists. Now I love Google Mail, Gmail, because they have my task checklist right there on the column, and I can check those off all day long. You can have that whole outstanding, satisfactory, needs improvement. You see that a lot on standards-based report cards, or 4, 3, 2, 1. 4 is exceeding the standards, 3 is met the standards, 2 is approaching the standards, 1 is not meeting standards. So I mean, we can think of all really a grade. Any type of grade is a symbol that reflects student progress or student achievement. Okay, so it could be a plus, a check, or a minus. That's grading, right? All right, so let's take a look at grading scales. So here's a scenario. We have a 100-point scale. Everybody's familiar with this, correct? 90 to 100 is an A. We're not going to grade on a curve. And we have a scenario down below. Billy's an A student. Due to some unknown emotional duress, Billy missed an important test worth 100 points, and he was unable to make it up. He couldn't get in and make it up, so he received a 0. There are only 10 assignments in the semester worth 10 points each. Can Billy get an A by the end of the semester? What do you think? Remember, he's already missed 100 points, so he's already 0 out of 100. So if he gets a 10 out of 10 on all the rest of the assignments, what is his total score at the end of the semester? His total score is a 100 out of 200, which is 50%. He gets an F, right? Missed one test. We already know he's a great kid. That's the 100-point grading scale. Let's look at that same grading scale, but let's use the 4-point scale, right? 4 points an A, 3 points a B, you know the rest. So Billy, the A student, due to unknown emotional duress, missed an important test worth 4 points. He was unable to make it up. He received a 0. There are only 10 assignments in the semester worth 4 points each. Can Billy get an A by the end of the semester? He can get a 40 out of 44. Right? Is that an A? I think so. Isn't it 90%? Something like that. Yeah. Okay. So you see that just by changing your grading scale, you can move to a more, I don't know the term, I guess you could say fair. But then you talk about weighting. Yeah, and a test should be more than a homework assignment, I guess. But this is just pointing to some of the inequalities that we see in our grading system today. When you have assignments that are too heavily weighted, a student's defeated. What do you think Billy's approach to those 10 assignments is going to be if he knows he can't pass the class anyway? Billy's totally checked out, right? I missed one test. There's no prayer that I'm going to get an A or I'm even going to get a D in this class, so why even try? That means I'm going to start cutting school. I'm going to totally give up. What's the point? But if you have a different kind of grading scale where it's more fairly weighted, you can keep students encouraged. There's always a chance, right? You can get caught up, and that's an essential component to being, fair. You don't always. I mean, there comes a point, when you're teaching AP, honors history as to juniors or seniors. I mean, these are the cream of the crop, top students that are going to college. One thing that drives me nuts about AP classes is these teachers beat the heck out of their kids with grades. It's hard to pass those classes. I'm sitting here thinking, you've got honors kids, right? These are the top students in your school that have their whole future ahead of them because they are incredibly bright, but now they're getting B's and C's in your class because you're making it inaccessible to them unless they're doing 3 or 4 hours of homework. And usually your top students are also involved in a lot of activities outside of school. And so you're basically saying, you know what? Congratulations for making honors. You don't have a prayer of going to a great university because the best you can get in my class is a B. That's what's the purpose of taking AP classes, right? If it's just that impossible, or you're going to be up till midnight every night doing your homework. Okay. Again, you're getting my opinion. These are not the views that are shared by Brandman University or any other university. This is purely Scott Borba's opinion. But when you think about, the whole idea, well, I'm going to take college prep classes. I'm going to get a 4.0, get all A's. That looks way better on a transcript than C's and B's. Okay. So, I mean, there's just a lot of things we have to think about if you're going to be teaching at that level. If you start teaching college, and people start paying for access, then you can, be a little harder on your grading, I guess. But we don't want to mess with people, young kids that are not even fully developed in their thinking yet. So which grading skill do you feel most comfortable using? We're not talking about which one is more fair. What are you more comfortable with? Why or why not? Anybody? Hand raisers, typers, anybody? Go for it, Kevin.
Well, I just use the universal one that we have at our school, which is a 40% for classwork and homework, 30% for projects, 20% for tests, and 10% for homework.
Okay. And you feel comfortable with that?
Yeah, we use Aries to weight it. So we just put in the scores, and then the electronic grade book will percentage those for you.
Okay. Are your students, the majority of them, successful?
Yeah, I found that I had some outliers, but that's because they were newcomers to the school and to the country.
Okay. Good. Anybody else? So I'm seeing the comments. A lot. What happens is a lot of times I can tell you this. I'm not picking on you, high school folks, but this is just where I've experienced it most. There's almost this like badge of honor when a teacher says, "Yeah, only 20% of the students in my class pass." Like that's like they're actually proud of that, right? I can't tell you how many times I've heard comments similar to that in my career. And it makes me want to vomit in my mouth. I mean, it really disappoints me as somebody who's an educator, because I'm thinking, if only 20% of the students in your class are passing, you're doing something wrong, right? Let's start looking at our teaching practices and our grading practices and our assessment practices, and ask ourselves, I'm not gonna pave this, I'm not gonna snowplow, the whole educational experience for my students. But at the same time, if my students are failing, I need to reflect on that, and that is a reflection of me as well. So, how about, should grading reflect effort or proficiency? Kevin, do you have another comment, or did you just not put your hand down? Okay, just checking. Okay. So why do you want to put effort into grading when we're talking about your grades on your report cards? Why should that reflect effort? Just want to push back a little bit. Come on, y'all put both, so y'all felt it. So somebody raise their hand and defend it. Man, I got quiet. I wish I had like a cricket sound. Go ahead, Cody.
I think just like anything else, like, the old analogy, like working out, you're not going to work out if you're just not putting any effort. You're not going to get stronger if you don't put effort.
Okay.
I think I would use the same analogy for school. If there's no effort, whether you're just trying too difficult of material and you're just failing and not really producing any, efficient learning that way, or if it's too easy and you're just breezing through everything, you're not really learning either. You're just kind of, working through the same things you already know. So I feel like effort is necessary to balance that out.
So I'm going to use your analogy, and I'm just going to play devil's advocate. I'm not going to disagree or agree with anybody in here tonight. But if I'm working out, let's say I could bench press 400 pounds. Mm-hmm. And I don't need to work very hard at it. I was just born naturally ripped. Mm-hmm. So I just walk up to it and I pound it out 25 times and I put it back and I walk away. And do I need to get any stronger? Or I'm already proficiently strong?
I think it would depend on what you define as need. Do you need to get stronger to get through high school? Probably not. Do you need to get stronger to reach the max of your potential? I think so. And I think that would be my goal as a teacher, is try to get each student as close to their potential.
That continuous growth idea.
Yeah.
If you're not growing, you're moving backwards. If you're not moving forward, you're moving backwards. And I agree with that idea. But I want to keep pushing back on everybody. Thanks, Cody, for your comments. I want to keep pushing back on that whole effort piece, because it could be a trap, right? Because you have some students that might make things look easy, but might be working hard. But they don't wear their emotions on their sleeves. They get their work done. It's in there, and they're just crushing it. But to you, you're like, man, if you just work harder. I could tell you, like, coaching. I've coached students. I've seen coaches just rip their kids. You need to work harder. And I see these kids working as hard as they can, and they just deflate their players by yelling things like, you need to work harder. You don't care enough. You need to. And it's like, well, who are you measuring them against? Is that you're measuring them against how you were, or this, unreachable, like this example that just nobody can attain? Just got to be careful, because if we really want to stay objective, because how do you even measure effort? How can you put a number on effort, right? We want to stay as objective as possible when it comes to grading. And I'm going to say that, one, because it's fair, and two, because it's safe. If you're a teacher, and somebody comes and challenges your grading, and you have the data to support the grade that you gave somebody, and it's written down and kept very neatly tracked because you were objective about every single mark a student gave and your syllabus and everything else, nobody has a leg to stand on to fight against you. But when you start bringing in grading towards things that are a little more subjective, like someone's effort, or whether or not they care, or I don't know, other areas, their behavior. Unless you have a way of tracking and monitoring and evaluating those areas, and you've created a rubric and that's part of your syllabus, you're gonna find yourself in a corner where administration is gonna have a tough time supporting you if you can't stay objective in that. Does that make sense? Terry, go ahead, and then Cody, you'll be next.
I have a question about the student that during the formative assessment, they're showing a lot of effort. They're right on cue as far as completing their work, understanding the work, but come the summative assessment time, they're terrible test takers. And let's say they fail all of their tests or get a D. How do you grade that student?
Right. So remember week 2, we talked about differentiating 3 different things: content, process, and product. And that's a great point you bring up, because we have kids who have test anxiety. So are there other ways that you can measure their academic proficiency without giving them this huge summative test? What's the answer to that? Absolutely, right? We take multiple measures. We take those formative assessments, and maybe you take the cumulative score of those formative assessments. You know whether or not the student knows the content, regardless of how they perform on a summative test. If that summative test is the only thing that tells you whether or not a student is successful or not in your class, shame on you. I mean, that's kind of like taking our CASP scores and really saying that's the kind of teacher I am. We know that kids have difficult times on assessments from time to time. You don't know what somebody woke up or what dealt with the night before a giant test. But that's why we use multiple measures. That's why we look at growth as opposed to, and we're going to talk about that, growth as opposed to proficiency. Good question. Cody, go ahead.
Yeah, so I am teaching 2nd grade right now, and I have about 5 kids in my class that scored a 0.0 on the STAR reading.
Mm-hmm.
My mentor at the school suggested, and this is how she works it, the only grade in the class is a weekly test. So we have like spelling tests, vocabulary tests, there's I think there's 6 total each week. She accommodates those students by, in the spelling test, they're only tested on the first half of the words. The comprehension, they're read to. The math, they only have to do half of the problems. And I kind of struggled with that morally because of exactly what you were saying about staying objective in the grading, because to me, it's not really fair to the other students. But at the same time, like you were saying earlier, I don't want to bury these kids and just deflate them because, just throw a test in front of them they can't read.
Sure. And are these students special education students with IEPs?
No.
Okay.
No, they're not. Because
a lot of times you could take your cues. You'll see more of those accommodations for students on an IEP, which is totally fair. If somebody has a disability, we need to make accommodations. But what I would suggest in a case like this is I would base a grade on a goal. I would set individual goals for students, and STAR lends itself nicely to this. So if I have a student who's a 0.0 and I say, okay, your goal is going to be to become a 0.6 by the end of the year. And that means I'm going to backward map from 0.6 to now. And that means you should grow 0.2 every trimester. That's your goal. And I'm going to do everything I can to get that student there. If they meet their goal, they've got an A, right? But then I might have another student in that same class who's reading at a 3.4. And I'm going to say, well, you know what? Your goal is to get to a 4.6. And so his goal is going to be different, but I'm going to measure, or I'm going to grade them based on their progress towards their goal. To me, that's basically what special education does. You set individual goals for students, but we can learn a lot from the IEP process and goal setting, because it's all about personalized learning. If we start saying, let's go back to No Child Left Behind, 2001, George Bush said, every student is going to be proficient. 100% of all students in the United States are going to be proficient by the year 2014. That was the goal that he set, 2014. What's funny, it was back in 2001, the first goal, the first benchmark was 14%. And that was for 2 years. So in 2001 and 2002, the goal was 14% of American students would be proficient. Think of how ridiculously low that is. Then the next 2 years, the goal was 28%. Then the next 2 years, the goal was 36%, still ridiculously low. Then the next 2 years, the goal was 42%. So now you have 8-year window that the goal was to go from 0 to 42%. Attainable? Absolutely. But what happened after 8 years? Well, then it went from 42 to 56 the next year, 63, 78, 85, and then 100, something like that. Why do you think it went like that? Well, it's because that president of that time had an 8-year term, and he wanted to be able to leave the office. And this is a non-political statement. It doesn't matter what party you're part of. He wanted to leave the office saying, when I came in, students were not proficient. When I left, we'd met our target. And then it was impossible after that. So then once, Bush left, we looked at every student succeeding, got rid of No Child Left Behind, and now we don't have all students have to reach for this exact same. That's like saying every giraffe needs to eat from that leaf way up there. Well, what about the short giraffes? Not every giraffe is created equal, right? That's equality, and equality isn't fair. Equity is. And so equity is all about, okay, how can I support some of them who can't reach that level? How do I challenge the ones who can reach it too easily? Does that make sense? Terry, you have another question?
No, I don't.
Okay, here we go. All right, frame of reference for grading. We talked about criterion referenced grading. Grades are designed to measure student performance against a fixed set of predetermined criteria. That's exactly what I just got done talking about, right? Or learning standards. Okay, so concise written descriptions of what students are expected to know and be able to do at a specific stage of their education. We have that. We have the standards. The standards are a criterion. Okay, and we are always basing all of our grades, and most, if you're using standards-based grading, this is what it is. Norm reference grading is different. So norm reference takes the standards, which is good, but their grades are determined after all scores are accumulated, and it's often called curving, but it's based on, you can look at a whole class, or you can do like norm reference for all fifth graders across the country. I know how many of you are familiar with NWEA testing or MAP testing. That's norm reference testing. Even STAR testing is norm reference. That grade equivalency you get and the ZPD you get at a STAR is based on students at that grade level across the country, or everybody that's using that software. So that's norm reference grading. It doesn't necessarily determine how they're doing against the standards. It's how they're doing against the standards compared to students at their grade level. Does that make sense? Okay. Assigning letter grades. You want to create a composite when you're going to assign letter grades. They need to be quantifiable, meaning they have to be objective. Do you have the evidence that supports a student getting a certain letter grade? The only time I'm okay when my teachers are a little subjective is if I've got a student with an 89.7, I'm like, give the kid an A, right? What is each assignment worth? You have to use a variety of approaches: tests, quizzes, papers, presentations, projects, etc. This is, again, that multiple measure, right? If a student's crushing the papers, presentations, and projects, but they bomb the tests, you have to be able to ask yourself, make an informed instructional decision here. Is that student proficient on academically in your classroom? Do they know what they're talking about? You can determine, you can answer that question as a teacher. If you know your kids, you can answer that question. And then you'll see a test score and go, that's just not them. So that's not going to be the grade they get. Okay, it's okay. You are the decision maker in your classroom. You can make that decision. So here's our attendance question tonight. Should homework be factored into a student's overall achievement grade? Why or why not? Again, homework, should it be factored into a student's overall achievement grade? Why or why not? Y'all, I have some of you in this class that haven't submitted a single attendance question for me, and you've probably been listening to all my lectures. I don't give attendance credit. That's 6 points a class, so you're going to miss 48 points if you don't answer these questions and email them to me. Okay, that's how you get the credit. And this is the one thing that I don't dock any late points from. So if you still want to go back to week 1 and watch that and answer the question and send it to me, I will give you 6 points for it. Okay, I just want to know that you listened to the content. Okay, homework. Good, this is a great conversation. I used to not have this as the attendance question because I liked having the banter, but it's okay. It's a good attendance question. So non-achievement outcomes. We talked about achievement outcomes. Let's talk about some non-achievement. So things that relate to student conduct, their behavior. Should we have a grade on the report card that's not tied to achievement, but talks about behavior? Why not? Yeah, that's a good thing. But what do we want to make sure, if you're going to put anything on that report card, if you don't learn anything tonight, what do you need to have? If you're going to put a letter, if you're going to put a grade or any kind, it might not be a letter grade, it might be a plus, minus, O, S, N, Q, P, whatever. What do you need to have if you're going to put a grade tied to behavior? Come on, people. Come on, I believe in you. Let's go back. Right there. What does it need to be? Kevin, go.
Okay, so at my school, I think what you're talking about is like a citizenship grade of satisfactory, unsatisfactory. So we have the academic breakdown that I explained earlier.
Okay.
But we also have a citizenship grade, which is more behavioral based, like how many times is that kid excused from the room? How many times do they have some kind of refocus form that they have to fill out?
Okay.
How many violations do they have?
Do you have criteria?
Yes, we do. We have different tiers.
Okay, good. So you've made citizenship quantifiable.
Yeah, there's satisfactory, unsatisfactory, acceptable, needs improvement. So and then we also have comments. The Aries, the grade book allows.
Absolutely, comments are a great thing to have.
Progress reports, report cards.
Yeah, as parents, that's the first thing we read is the comments. But let's think about that. It needs to be quantifiable. So if you're going to put a mark on a student's report card, it means you have to have criteria stating, in order to get an outstanding, a student must have 0 or 1 or less referrals. In order to get satisfactory, a student must have 1 to 3 referrals. You have to have that criteria. It has to be part of the handbook you send home. And then you better be keeping track of how many referrals that student has when you turn in that grade, because the last thing you want is a parent coming saying, well, why did my student get a needs improvement on this? And you're like, well, they just don't pay attention and they mess around at recess. Well, what evidence do you have? How often? Then you look lost. Okay, you want to be able to say, oh, right here. On October 12th, they pushed a student and made him fall. On November 1st, they spit on little Susie in the lunchroom. And you do that, and what's the parent going to do? Oh, okay, thank you. That's it. And hopefully you've called the parent, but that's another conversation. So how about study habits? Responsibility grades. How do we measure responsibility? A lot of people will say, well, with homework, right? So then I would say, how about the kid who's going home and cooking dinner for their 5 siblings and then goes and works and babysits to earn an extra money to help the family, and then it's 10 o'clock at night and they don't do their homework because they're exhausted? Is that student irresponsible? No, I would beg to differ. Citizenship, right? Just if you're going to measure it, make sure you have criteria. What does it mean to be a good citizen? Effort. How do you measure effort? These are the things we get in trouble, but these things are measured all the time. Participation. What does that look like? Let's talk about that one. I've heard of participation grades, right? Shoot, I would probably admit to I've used participation grading before. I also teach at one of the state universities. I teach a law class for administrators, and I give a participation grade. Exit tickets, quick checks. But what about the kids who, what are you going to do? If you don't have kids participating, whose fault is that? because we're talking about engagement. Participation is just a fancy word for engagement. Are students engaged? And whose responsibility is it to engage students? It's yours. It's yours. So if you're going to give a grade for participation and kids aren't participating and you're giving them bad grades, ouch, right? You see where I'm going with that? Okay. Homework. There's it is. Should we grade homework? All right. Tools for reporting non-achievement outcomes. Rating scales are great. Checklists. We talked about reports, notes. Be sure to have quantifiable data to support a non-achievement outcome. All right. So we're going to kind of flip away from the whole idea of grading and what we want to do about grading. You want to keep track. If you're not an organized person, that's okay. You can still be a good teacher, but there's got to be at least one area that you are organized in, and that is keeping track of grades. Okay. You have to have a grade book. There's so many options. You can go old school and have the old paper spiral bound grade book, or there's tons of ones online software. There's some that are free. There's some that you pay for. Aries, most of your schools, your SIS system has its own inherent grade book. Portfolios. I love student portfolios. Great way of keeping track. Think about anecdotal notes regarding behavior. Why not keep a folder of all of your students, if you're special, and maybe not if you're in high school and you have 160 contacts, but if you're junior high or elementary and you have less contacts, possibly keeping a file for every student and keeping notes on kids. This is a great time to talk about parent-teacher conferences. This should not be the first time you talk to a parent. If you are introducing yourself to your students' parent at parent-teacher conferences, you're missing out. Okay, you've missed the ball. And I would even challenge you, depending on how late your back to school night is, that shouldn't be the first time. The more proactive you are in meeting with your parents, the better it's going to serve you. I want you to view your parents as an ATM machine. Now, I remember being in college and walking up to an ATM machine with my card and praying that money would come out. I'd put it in there and I'd get that little ticket and it would say insufficient funds. Well, why were my funds insufficient? Because I didn't make enough deposits. Well, here's the deal. Parents are a lot like ATM machines. You've got to make deposits because there are going to come times during the term where you're going to have to make withdrawals. And if the funds are insufficient, you got a problem on your hands. That's when administration gets involved. But you're going to handle your business if you're making positive contacts with parents starting before the school year starts. If you're calling parents before that first day of school and introducing yourself and saying how excited you are to meet their child. Can you tell me 2 or 3 things that really excites your child about learning? Can you tell me one thing you guys did over the summer that they might want to share? Can you tell me what your child's favorite sport is? Can you tell me what their birthday is? I'm keeping track of all that. Oh my gosh. How many of you are parents in here? How many of you would be shocked and also excited to get a phone call like that in July, right? That would be incredible. What would you think about this teacher? This person really cares for teaching. I am so excited. Honey, your teacher just called me. They're going to be amazing. It's going to be great. You've already won before they even step foot in your classroom. What do you think the first day of school is going to be like for that kid? Are they going to be nervous to come in your classroom? Maybe, but a lot less than they would have had you not called, right? What if you went and knocked on doors and just introduced yourself to families? Right? What if you called home every Friday? This is actually something we do at my school. They're called home calls. Every Friday we do home calls. And after you call 2 parents, you can actually go home early. But you got to call 2 parents, and it's got to be positive contacts. Hey, Mrs. Lopez, I just wanted to call and let you know what a pleasure it was to have Ricky in class this week. He was helpful. He was on task. And man, he was just really great. And I can't wait to see him on Monday. I hope you have a good weekend. What do you think Ricky's weekend's going to be like? Mom's going to hang up and be like, oh, Ricky, you're the best. I'm so proud of you. And he's going to have a great weekend. But what happens is we only call parents when we have bad news. we've created a culture where when the parent sees the school's number on their cell phone, they're like, oh, what did he do now? We've got to change that. And you totally can. You totally can. You can be just the greatest teacher ever. And it just takes a few minutes, a little bit of effort right there up front. Put money in that ATM machine. When you're at parent-teacher conferences, start with the strengths of the student. Don't start dumping on that parent. They've probably had a hard day at work and dealing with life. They don't want to hear you dump. Right when they sit down, I just want to let you know how much I love having your child in my class. They contribute so much to discussions. They've got a great sense of humor. I can always count on them to make me smile. And then you talk about the areas that they need to grow under. But I would also ask the parents, what strengths do you see at home? Let's start this conversation out on a positive note, right? Ask parents what their concerns are first before you start dumping on them. A lot of times the parents might have the exact same concerns, right? So you ask them and you say, so what are your concerns about Billy academically? And they might say, I'm really concerned about his reading comprehension. That's where you say, you know what, I share that same concern. Now you're not ripping on their kid. Now you're validating their feelings and concerns. Same thing. You were probably going to talk about that, and you might have a checklist. You just check it off. And if a parent doesn't get to one of the concerns you have, you can read the room and just say, I also have an additional concern that I just want to bring up and make you aware of. And that's where you do it. But the thing is, a three-legged stool is the most stable stool you can build, right? And that three-legged stool is you, it's the parent, and it's the student. Okay. And you've got to all be working together. If any one of those members of that stool is checked out, you're going to wobble and fall over. Okay. You all have to be in there. Make sure you have documentation. Don't just go over the grades and show them this report. Here's why, here's some examples of your child's work right now. And this is why they're earning the grade that they have right now. See, I think if we work on these areas here, which I'm going to try to do, boom, 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 you're good. Listen to parents. I can't tell you how many parent-teacher conferences I've sat in as an administrator, and the teacher does all the talking. This isn't your opportunity to dump on parents, okay? This is the opportunity for you to listen. If they have nothing to say, you can fill the air. You can talk and pull information out of the parents. You want to get to know their child, because parent-teacher conferences are at the beginning of the year. You want to get to know their child. If you have spring conferences later, usually you're meeting with the kids who are struggling, right? And then you can be a little more talkative in that one. Set goals. This one I love. Oh man, one of my schools, we actually had parent-teacher conferences before school started. It was so cool. And we set goals together. So we had the kid, we had the parent, and me sitting right there. It was like, hey, what do you think your goal should be in reading this by the end of the first trimester? What do you think your goals should be in math? What do you want to know? Here are the standards. How do you think you're going to do? What do you think, Mom? Yeah. Oh gosh, man, when they weren't meeting those goals, it was like, man, we signed a contract before school started. This is what you were going to do. Remember, your mom was there. Oh, so it was just powerful. It was really powerful. Here's some links for you to consider. There are articles when you're considering the homework debate. Let's see, I can post them in the chat. I know you all like that. There they are. Check those out. You can read those, maybe help you craft your argument, or if maybe you thought one thing, and maybe I'll change your mind a little bit. I don't know. We'll see. I look forward to reading those though. Let me see. This is it. This is next week's our last meeting. It's a bummer. It's gone by quick. So make sure you get caught up if you are behind. Some credit's better than no credit. So get those assignments in. I hate having to not pass people. It bums me out. So just try to get your work in, okay? Also, I think your course evaluations went live in the last couple days. Please make sure you put comments. I love reading those comments on how I'm doing and how I can get better as a online professor. So anyway, Any questions? That was a quick 50 minutes, huh? Man. Any questions, comments, concerns before we sign off? We're done a little bit early. The link in the web quest goes in the comments box. So you copy and paste the link out of your address bar to your web quest and paste it in the comment box. The attendance question. Yes, we did have an attendance question, Cynthia. Did you miss it? Does anybody want to help Cynthia by typing it in the message box? Any other questions, comments, concerns? Good. Everybody's good. Thank you, Terry. That's the attendance question. You bet, Cynthia. How do you create the rubric? Remember last week we talked about assessment and we talked about building a rubric. You're going to create maybe an 8x8 box, or actually it'd be 10x10 or 5x5. Sorry, not 8x8, 5x5. And then you'd have a 4-point scale across the top and your areas that you're assessing. And then you'd have to define each area. A little bit of work, but it's good. Copy the WebQuest link from your address bar, Greg, and you post it or paste it in the comments box in Blackboard when you submit your WebQuest. It's a lot of work, absolutely, Terry, those rubrics. But one thing about rubrics, as much work as you put into them, once you do it, you can always refine them. I'm talking about like when you start teaching. It's a really effective tool for grading. Yes, Sunday by midnight.